Africa is poised to become the world's next economic powerhouse, but why does it feel like the West is holding it back? Is this a coincidence, or is there a larger strategy at play? Africa's growth has been undeniable, with booming economies, vast natural resources, and a youthful population ready to lead the global workforce. But despite this potential, many wonder, why does it seem like Western powers are trying to slow Africa's rise? From economic policies to political maneuvering, there's a complex web of influences at play. In this video, we'll explore why the West might fear Africa's growing influence and what it could mean for the future of global power. Is Africa's rise inevitable, or will the West manage to keep it in check? Let's dive in and uncover the truth. The history of Western influence in Africa is deeply intertwined with colonialism, which left a lasting imprint on the continent's political, social, and economic structures. For centuries, European powers carved up Africa during the scramble for Africa, exploiting its vast resources and using its people as forced labor to fuel industrialization in the West. The legacy of colonialism is still felt today in the borders that often divide ethnic and cultural groups, creating tensions that persist in many African countries. Politically, many African nations inherited governance systems designed to benefit colonial powers, leaving newly independent states with weak institutions and little experience in self-rule. Despite the end of formal colonial rule in the mid-20th century, the West's influence in Africa has not disappeared. Through economic policies, trade agreements, and the control of international financial institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Western powers continue to exert significant influence over the continent's development. These institutions have often imposed structural adjustment programs on African countries, which prioritize debt repayment and austerity measures over the needs of the people. In exchange for loans, African nations were required to cut public spending, reduce social services, and open their markets to foreign competition, policies that have frequently hindered local development and entrenched poverty. Trade agreements between Africa and the West have also been skewed in favor of the latter. Historically, African countries have exported raw materials and resources while importing finished goods, perpetuating a cycle of dependency. While African nations possess vast natural resources, from oil to minerals, their ability to extract and process these resources domestically is often limited by foreign corporations and Western interests. This means that much of the wealth generated from Africa's resources flows out of the continent, leaving little behind to build local economies or improve living standards. The issue of foreign aid has been another tool through which the West has maintained its influence in Africa. While aid is often portrayed as a benevolent act, it has frequently been used as a mechanism to keep African countries dependent on Western nations. Instead of fostering true independence, foreign aid often comes with strings attached, such as the requirement to adopt Western-backed policies or align with Western geopolitical interests. Additionally, many African nations find themselves trapped in a cycle of debt as they borrow funds to finance development projects, only to struggle with repayment. This debt trap limits their ability to make independent decisions and perpetuates a cycle of dependency, leaving many countries vulnerable to external pressures and control. In this complex web of economic and political relationships, the West's influence continues to shape Africa's future, often in ways that hinder the continent's ability to achieve true sovereignty and self-sustaining growth. Western interference in Africa's development is starkly illustrated by several case studies. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, the country's vast resources, including cobalt, diamonds, and copper, are critical to global industries like tech and manufacturing. However, these resources have been exploited by Western corporations without regard for local well-being. Companies in the mining and tech sectors have reaped immense profits while contributing to the ongoing conflict and instability in the DRC. The exploitation of natural resources, often supported by foreign governments, has kept the nation in a state of political chaos, preventing its wealth from benefiting its people and hindering long-term economic development. In Zimbabwe, the West's role in undermining the country's potential is seen through the sanctions imposed by the US and EU. Initially aimed at punishing the government for its land reform policies, these sanctions crippled Zimbabwe's economy, led to hyperinflation, and stifled foreign investment. Despite the country's vast natural resources, including minerals and fertile land, the sanctions disproportionately impacted ordinary Zimbabweans, not the government. Rather than fostering democratic reform, the sanctions led to further economic collapse, reinforcing Zimbabwe's dependence on foreign powers and hindering its ability to use its resources for sustainable growth. Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer, offers another example of Western exploitation. Oil companies like Shell and Chevron have operated in the country for decades, extracting significant wealth, yet much of that wealth has left the country. Local communities in the Niger Delta, where oil extraction is concentrated, suffer from extreme poverty and environmental degradation caused by oil spills and gas flaring. Western corporations have consistently neglected environmental regulations and the rights of local populations. This emphasis on extraction rather than sustainable development has prevented Nigeria from leveraging its vast oil resources to build a thriving economy that benefits its people. These case studies, of the DRC, Zimbabwe, and Nigeria, show how Western powers and corporations maintain influence over Africa by exploiting resources, imposing economic sanctions, and fostering instability. This interference has kept African nations from fully realizing their potential, ensuring continued dependency on the West and hindering their path to self-sufficiency. Despite Africa's growing economic potential, the West has long employed a variety of tactics to slow down the continent's progress. One of the most prominent methods is through trade barriers and sanctions. While Africa holds a wealth of natural resources, its access to global markets is often restricted by unfair trade agreements, tariffs, and quotas that favor Western economies. These trade restrictions limit African nations' ability to export finished goods, forcing them to sell raw materials at lower prices. This system perpetuates the dependency of African economies on Western markets, making it harder for the continent to diversify and add value to its industries. Additionally, sanctions are frequently imposed on African nations with leaders or policies that challenge Western interests. These sanctions create economic hardship, destabilize local economies, and hinder efforts at development, leaving African countries more vulnerable to external control. Beyond economic barriers, political interference is another powerful tool used by Western powers to maintain influence in Africa. In many cases, Western countries have supported political instability or even direct intervention to ensure that African leaders align with Western interests. This has often included backing corrupt regimes that are willing to serve Western agendas, even when these leaders fail to address the needs of their people. By fostering political instability, the West ensures that African nations remain fragmented, making it harder for them to unite or form strong, independent regional blocs. This disunity prevents African countries from pursuing policies that could break free from Western influence, particularly in terms of economic independence and resource control. Multinational corporations also play a significant role in hindering Africa's economic growth. Many of these companies, which are often based in Western countries, exploit Africa's vast natural resources without reinvesting in local communities or economies. Instead of using the wealth generated from African resources to build infrastructure, improve education, or create sustainable industries, these corporations extract profits that are sent back to their home countries. This extraction model leaves African nations with few long-term economic benefits, and it undermines the development of local industries. In some cases, these corporations have been complicit in environmental degradation and human rights violations, further deepening the continent's challenges. Together, these economic tactics form a complex web of barriers that limit Africa's growth. By maintaining control over trade, politics, and resources, the West ensures that Africa's rise remains in check, preventing the continent from realizing its full potential. However, as Africa continues to push for greater independence, these tactics are becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. As Africa's economic and political power grows, it presents a challenge to Western global dominance. For centuries, the West has held significant control over the world's geopolitical landscape, but Africa's rapid development is shifting the balance of power. One of the most significant aspects of this rise is the increasing influence of China, which has invested heavily in African infrastructure, trade, and industry. Through the Belt and Road Initiative and other strategic partnerships, China is positioning itself as a key ally to many African countries, providing an alternative to Western influence. This growing Chinese presence in Africa poses a direct challenge to the West, which has long relied on the continent's resources and strategic position. If Africa becomes less reliant on Western countries and institutions, it could drastically change global power dynamics. Economically, Africa's rise has the potential to disrupt the global financial system. The continent is home to vast untapped markets, young populations, and increasingly diverse economies. With a rapidly growing middle class and expanding sectors like technology, agriculture, and manufacturing, Africa is emerging as a key driver of global economic growth. This success threatens the West's traditional economic dominance, particularly as African nations begin to develop their own financial systems and trade networks. As African countries gain economic clout, they may challenge Western-dominated global institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, potentially creating new economic alliances that bypass the established order. This could lead to a significant shift in global trade patterns and financial systems, making it harder for the West to maintain its grip on economic power. Another critical aspect of why the West fears Africa's rise is the continent's vast natural resources. Africa is rich in oil, minerals, and other raw materials that are essential to the global economy. For decades, Western corporations have exploited these resources, often with little regard for the environment or the local populations. As Africa's economies grow stronger, there is a growing movement to ensure that the wealth generated from these resources stays within the continent, rather than flowing out to foreign corporations and governments. If African countries gain more control over their natural resources, it would reduce Western access and potentially undermine the economic systems that depend on them. This loss of control over valuable resources is a significant threat to the Western powers that have long relied on Africa's wealth to fuel their own economic growth. Africa's rise offers a chance for a new global order, where the continent challenges traditional powers and reshapes the economic landscape. The potential for transformation is immense, and understanding these dynamics is crucial for all of us. Explore Africa's growing influence and reflect on the role we can each play in shaping a more balanced global future. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.